Greetings. Welcome one and all to the November 2015 Earthkeeper Crystal Stargate gathering in beautiful Hot Springs National Park, Arkansas, the crystalline center of the new planet Earth. And so, it is my honor and great pleasure to introduce author, geologist, channel, and founder of Earthkeeper, James Tyberonn. James will speak today on a topic entitled, The New Earth and the New Human. An Earthkeeper round of applause, please, for James Tyberonn.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this is a very, very special, powerful time that we're all experiencing. I consider Edgar Cayce to be the patriarch of modern channel, the patriarch of the New Age. And then in my case, after I read the Cayce information while I was overseas, I had a tendency not to watch television. I read metaphysical books. And so the Seth material written by Jane Roberts was very influential for me. From the Seth material, I went into the Lobsang Rampa book, some of the Vedic literatures, Buddhism. I studied virtually every religion. I read the Quran, I read the Bible, just had this hunger to know. I want to also acknowledge the scientific that are bringing that information in together. Dr. Carl Sagan, who I'm going to talk about a little bit, has brought forth some tremendous information that I think ties in with Cayce. And John Van Auken has just done an incredible job of his interpretation of the Cayce readings, and in that broad view that helps us understand things. So again, John will be speaking tonight in the keynote spot at 7:30, and he'll be speaking tomorrow morning. But there's no one on earth that understands the Cayce readings, that understands Egyptian mysticism, and so I want to acknowledge John. Dr. Robert Schoch is another scientist that has brought about tremendous information that helps bring us that full circle. One of our speakers today will be Andrew Collins. Andrew and Hugh Newman are over here from the UK, and Andrew has just done some brilliant work that he'll talk about. Graham Hancock will be here on Saturday, and what a tremendous speaker, what an eloquent and incredible intellect. He's spoken at 5 of our events. I have a tremendous respect for him. So to speak a little bit about Arkansas, this is a very, very unique and interesting land. It has one of the most unusual geologies. I am, by education, a geologist. Of course, when you're born into an area, you don't necessarily appreciate it. But I was born in this part of Arkansas here, not too far from when Bill Clinton was born. My father was with the University of Arkansas, and we used to come here to Hot Springs most weekends because he was an avid fisherman. We would go to Lake Ouachita, and he would fish, and I would dive for quartz crystals. I could fill up a coffee can with little shards of quartz crystal in about the same time that he could catch what he would phrase in Arkansas vernacular as a mess of fish. And so I've always had an awareness of Arkansas being special, and I was always attracted to the crystals. In our trips back from Hot Springs to Little Rock, there were crystal shops everywhere. And they always had these low-lying tables that were about 40 feet long and about 18 inches off the ground. And occasionally we would stop there to get a soft drink or get a coffee. And often they were connected to places where you would get gasoline for your car. And I can remember in those days, massive crystals laying on these low-lying tables and clusters that were basically being sold as garden embellishments, as garden decorations. And I'm talking about 4 or 5 foot crystal points that you could basically get for $40 or $50. And so it was always something that fascinated me. And so Arkansas really is a very, very unique place. And I spent the first 24 years of my life here. and experienced many of these places. And I'm writing a book about the crystal vortex. But it's no accident to me. I tell people often that my life makes more sense in retrospect than it did while I was going through it. And some of these places are extraordinary. Absolutely unique energies, and there is a reason why. The rare geology and geometrics of Arkansas. Arkansas is, as you saw in the last photograph, the largest singular, and that's important, singular, strata of quartz crystal on the planet. What that means is, starting at the area of Little Rock, there is sort of a backwards C shape of quartz that extends for almost 180 miles. And it hits the surface in certain places. And you're sitting on one of them. This hotel is in one of the most powerful energetic regions on the earth. This little mountain side that is right next to us produces the thermal waters that are piped into this hotel. Marcel Vogel was one of the first ones to talk about how crystals can structure water. All of the water that's coming into this spa, all of the water that circulates in this area, whether it be the cold springs or the hot springs, is structured water. This hotel was originally built in 1877. Burnt down, was rebuilt, burnt down, was rebuilt, and the structure that you're in now, for the most part, was built in 1925. It has quite a history. There's a unique energy in here. There are certain floors that are known for manifestations. But what I want to tell you is that the energy that is here, to a certain degree, is a residue based in time, specifically recorded because of the fact that that film, that projected energy of quartz crystal, which is absolutely a transmitter and receiver and a recorder, replays events from the past randomly. And that occurs in a lot of places on the earth, like Scotland, where they have a lot of granite, places in Europe where there's a lot of quartz. But basically, the quartz that is here plays some interesting phenomenal games in terms of recording events. What is it that is used in a computer to store or record data? Silicon. Thus Silicon Valley. What is quartz? Silicon dioxide. So you're in a recorded area. And so a lot of these things that these paranormal researchers are really interested in, I mean, most of what you're seeing is just recordings of emotions. But there are, of course, Devic energies. John Van Auken spoke at one of our past events about Devic energies. There is a white energy. One of the things, my wife Ann is from Scotland. We met in 1977 in Brazil. And she has always had a remarkable ability, as did most of the Celtic traditions in her family, of seeing the Devic kingdom. And when we got here a couple of days ago, Ann has always worn little ladybug pins. It was a little good luck thing. We didn't even have the windows open in our room, and suddenly there's just about 10 little ladybugs all over her. But it is late in the year for them to be here, and that has always been something that represented a special Devic energy. But what a lot of the people here consider as the lady in white is a Devic energy. It's a positive energy. And of course, the paranormal always try to call it a ghost. It's an evil thing like that. There's certain waiters that I've spoken to in this hotel that won't go on certain floors. And which floor are you on? 9. No, my point is this. You are in an area where it doesn't matter what floor you're on. These manifestations are occurring because there is a hyper-dimensional facility in this quartz zone. no matter where you are, and the fact that you're in this particular location here, next to this unique water, next to this massive structure of quartz, you that have the developed pineal, that have the ability to sense energies in an empathic sensitivity, are going to sense things. And it's nothing to be feared. In fact, it is a attribute of what we may call the new earth. But you will not be in a more powerful energy than what you are here. It is the crystalline shift. And so one of the important things while you're here is to realize that you're in an amplification energy. Quartz is an amplifier. Quartz is a receiver. Quartz is a transmitter. So it's very important while you are here at this conference, while you are here in this energy, to project positive. Don't let the little things bother you. If there is some sort of issue in a restaurant, if you're not quite happy with something about your room, let it go. We are a reunion of the law of one. You can draw tremendous energy from this gathering, tremendous energy from some of these ascended master teachers that are here, and there are some absolute brilliant teachers here this weekend. Focus on that. Focus on the positive. Don't get bottled into a negative energy, a complaining energy, because it will amplify. You focus on the positive, and that will amplify. And so this is a unique area. Quartz has attributes that I'll talk about this afternoon called piezoelectricity, piezoluminescence, and these are scientific, but they also have attributes that I'll speak about that relate to our multidimensionality aspects. You have magnetics. How many of you saw the road signs that led you or mentioned a town called Magnet Cove? That is one of the most unusual mineralogy areas in the world. It has bipolar magnetite. Magnetite that is anionic on both ends. And that's really interesting. And so you have a 180-mile stretch, 35 miles wide, 180 miles long, of singular quartz crystal, surrounded by an enormous pocket of magnetics. Cryon, in 1998, said the evidence of Atlantis would be found in Arkansas. I was at that Cryon gathering when he said that. And that triggered me into what I'm doing now, because I grew up here. I know this area. I am part of Arkansas. I love Arkansas, but I know Arkansas. And I was always interested in the quartz. And as soon as I finished university, I moved to the other enormous quartz crystal area on the planet, Brazil. And I lived in Brazil for 7 years, from the Amazon to Bahia, to Minas Gerais, to all of the areas of crystals. And I studied them. And when I was in Brazil, I had my salary, which was only about $800 a month at that time, as a geologist, cut such that I had to receive, I was being paid in dollars, and they changed the plan so that I had to receive 25% of my salary in cruzeiros, which was the Brazilian currency at that time, at the official rate. And the currency was devaluating at 400% a year. So if I put that money in the bank and went to a geological site, when I came back, it was worth, 2 weeks later, a lot less than it was when I put it in. And within about 3 months, it was valueless. So you had to buy something with it. So what did I buy? I did what all the Brazilians did. I bought gemstones. And Brazil is a cornucopia of every gemstone in the world. Right about that time, a German man, as I mentioned, gave me a copy of There Is a River. And Edgar Cayce started talking midway through the book about the attributes of gemstones. And John's going to talk about that tomorrow. Had it have come from somebody else, I wouldn't have paid attention. But because of Cayce's integrity, there was no ulterior motive. He was writing about a forgotten science. And so I had the ability, not only the ability, I had the need to buy gemstones. So I decided I'd better study about them so that I'm not buying broken glass. And I started taking gemology courses. I was working a routine of 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And I was going out and buying gemstones primarily from my landlord, from the person I rented my house for, because all Brazilians had to either buy real estate, gold, or gemstones. And gemstones were everywhere. And then Casey was talking about how these had special attributes. And before too long, and I have a photograph of myself with Jose Luis, my landlord, and there's a pile of topaz, a pile of opals, a pile of amethyst, a pile of everything, just massive. And I was getting emeralds for about 50 cents a carat. And you can find those things down there direct from the mines at remarkable prices. And the markup on retail jewelry is absolutely unbelievable. And I was getting emeralds for $20 that were being valued in the States at over $1,000. But gemstones have living attributes. This is a laser. The first laser was formed by passing light through a ruby. And this is coherent light. Marcel Vogel speaks about gemstones having the ability to project coherent light. French Nobel Prize winner Monsieur, and I've spoken about this before because it was a headline article first mentioned by David Wilcox and then by William Henry. A laser beam in a scientific experiment in which they were trying to understand cellular structure to find a cure for AIDS, actually created a theta wave pulse. And later today, I'll play a theta wave pulse. But they created a 7.8 theta wave pulse, ran a laser beam through frog eggs. How many of you have heard of this? How many of you have tried it at home? They passed the laser beam through frog eggs into a lizard, and the lizard gave birth to frogs. And this is documented, repeatable. The idea being that coherent light in a theta frequency vibration is able to carry life force. Marcel Vogel spoke about gemstones and 5 crystals emitting coherent energy. And this is a really important aspect, I think, of the changes that are taking place on the earth. And I'll talk a little bit later this afternoon about azurite and incoherency as well. So the waters that are occurring here are slightly radioactive. Edgar Casey actually recommended radium as being beneficial to your health. How many of you knew that? Very few. Radium is in these waters. Kimberlite diamond pipes are found in Murfreesboro, Arkansas, less than an hour from here. The only location in the lower 48 in which true diamonds, I'm not talking about Herkimer quartz, which they call Herkimer diamonds, I'm talking about true 10 on the 10 scale of the Mo density. True diamonds are found less than an hour from here in kimberlite green soil pipes. I went there with Ronna Herman in 2008, and I found a 1.3 carat diamond. It is a beautiful place. How many of you are staying over? That is a place that you might consider going to. It's a remarkable energy. Sodalite. One of the largest deposits of sodalite is in Magnet Cove, Arkansas. And sodalite contains azurite. And I'll talk a little bit this afternoon about the varying types of lapis. Lapis lazuli was recommended by Edgar Casey more than any other gemstone. And it's very affordable. And we're going to talk about that a little bit this afternoon as well. But what I have attempted to do is separate the references of lapis. Casey referred to lapis lazuli, lapis linguis, and lapis ligarius. This afternoon, I'm going to attempt to separate that, and I have readings and scientific bases that give me clues on how to do that. I consider that lapis lazuli is the pyritic lapis, and that lapis linguis is azurite, and I'll tell you why I've separated those, but that will be an interesting. So Arkansas has all of these together. It's an extreme energy. It creates a vortexial area, and I think there's a science behind that as well. And it's that combination of quartz and azurite. A lot of people don't know, and a lot of people aren't aware of some of the interesting attributes about Arkansas. But as I said, we try to combine the metaphysical with the science, and without getting too extreme either way. But Carroll is the one that channeled that Arkansas was an Atlantean colony, and it makes sense, does it not? If the Edgar Cayce readings are prolific on Atlantis. I've had conversations with Robert Schoch and Graham Hancock, and they are both convinced, as I'm sure Andrew is, of past advanced civilizations that were wiped out, possibly due to a meteor strike sometime between 12,000 and 18,000 years ago. And when you hear Andrew speak about Göbekli Tepe, when you hear Graham Hancock speak about the magicians of the gods, there's some pretty compelling evidence that, in Graham's words, we are a society with amnesia. We have had highly developed epochs in the past that we cannot connect to, and they all have that flood theory. So something happened. And Graham's going to talk about the meteor strikes of eastern Canada. And a lot of you are from eastern Canada, and it's that area with all the nickel deposits, Sudbury. That's probably where these iron nickel meteorites impacted that melted these ice caps. But it would make sense, would it not, that if we had an advanced society of the past that used a Tesla-esque type energy using quartz crystals, that Arkansas would have been a deposit, and that Brazil would have been a deposit that they utilized and colonized. Makes sense. And the fact that there is magnetics combined with quartz here in Arkansas, perhaps in the future we will understand the physics behind the dimensional apertures of the torus, of the wormholes that connect us to not only other areas of space, but other epochs of time. And I was speaking with Richard Hoagland and Robert Schoch about some of the interesting aspects of time. And there is a lot of science being discovered about that now. But we are multi-dimensional beings. And what happened in 2012, in my opinion, was that the earth expanded. Earth energies are changing, and these changes affect humanity. The greatest mechanism is solar radiation. All biology, virtually all biology as we know it, occurred during a time called the Cambrian radiation, or the Cambrian explosion. A short time ago in the slow dance of geological time, 550 million years ago, we were in a period of solar peak as we are now, speculated by people like Robert Schoch, and that it was during this Cambrian radiation that virtually all mammalian biological life as we know it now suddenly occurred. If you check the fossil records past 600 million years ago, when the Earth is 4.64 billion years old, if you go back past 500 million years, you won't find any fossils of mammal-type life. It all occurred virtually overnight during that period. Isn't that interesting? Within the last 3 decades, there have been more X-class coronal mass ejection than any other time since we've been recording them. The DNA shifts were predicted by Edgar Cayce in 1930, were spoken about by Lee Carroll and Cryon in The Crystal Children, and were revealed in the multi-million-dollar government Human Genome Project. Edgar Cayce spoke about a new body occurring after 1998. Dr. Carl Sagan, the famous astrophysicist, the famous author who wrote Cosmos, said that the only viable substitute for carbon, and we are carbon-based, is silicon. What is silicon? It's the base element of quartz, silicon dioxide. Why is carbon and silicon comparable and capable of supporting biological life? Is the valence points. They both have 4 valence points capable of holding the complex polyhedrons and molecular structures necessary to support biological life. Isn't that interesting? And so our Earth has changed over 4.6 million years ago. This is just a quick little diagram of the tectonic shifts that have occurred over the last millions of years. At one time, there was one massive supercontinent called Pangaea. So Earth changes are part of the nature of our reality. Solar radiation is the driver of the shift. The Genome Project shows that under the intense changes of solar radiations, DNA can shift. Now, one of the things that I want to show you that you may not be aware of is this. Now, the first person to speak about this was Dr. Greg Braden. And then Susan Joy Renison of the UK spoke about it. Both, and there were several Russian physicists that spoke about it. Now, this is a NASA photograph from 2003. It was on their website. This is anionic plasma. Now, coronal mass ejections, and let me just back up a little bit here, if it'll let me. These coronal mass ejections, and we're having them constantly now. Can you hear me okay? Is the microphone carried? These coronal mass ejections have billions and billions and billions of tons of anionic plasma. Plasma is simply a subatomic particle, in this case, a negatively charged ion, similar to an electron. It is an anionic charge. Now, Bernice Barlow wrote a remarkable book a few years ago, Dr. Bernice Barlow, called Sacred Sites of the West, that I happened to pick up one day, actually in Banff, Canada, and read it. And she talks about studies that relate back to Dr. Mesner. How many of you are familiar with the French Dr. Mesner, who worked with deep hypnosis? Dr. Mesner would take patients and put them between 2 massive magnets with the anionic or the negative charge. And he was able to take them not only into the subconscious, but into the super subconscious, where common lay people, uneducated people, would reach states that Edgar Cayce or a Buddhist might call the God mind. Edgar Cayce might call universal mind. With these magnets, he was able to traverse dimensions and take people into a plurality field of brilliant consciousness. And he used anionics to do that. So remember that, and I'll come back to it. And so these coronal mass ejections that are occurring are absolutely bombarding the Earth with what could be considered a magnetic charge, an anionic charge. Now, according to Dr. Bernice Barlow, the normal ratio of anions to cations, negative to positive, is 5-3. But when it is shifted for 6-1, according to a university study that she quotes, and listen to this, people have hallucinations. Now, that's the university study. And she points out that Native American tribes, the spiritual tribes, the Hopi, the Lakota, the Navajo, chose their places of vision questing in places that had an unusual anionic background, places that had sinkholes, places that had minerals that exude anionic charges. And these people would go there, didn't want to live there because it had a certain imbalance. They would go there in order to have vision. University of Southern California calls it hallucinations. Perhaps that ionic shift creates a biochemistry in the brain that activates that little portal that we call the pineal and takes us into a theta resonance of higher dimension. Graham Hancock speaks a lot about the human brain not being the generator of consciousness, but being the receiver of consciousness. It's like a television station, and when we learn how to change those levels from theta to beta to alpha, we can pick up different stations. And so these coronal mass ejections that are happening, that are circulating the Earth, are creating a shift that makes us more capable, perhaps, by bringing in a more theta brainwave vibration that takes us a little bit out of the alert consciousness, that beta field of getting things done. I remember when I was in college, a friend of mine had a poster that said, "Be alert, the world needs more alerts." And our society encourages that beta consciousness where past societies honored the dreamer, the theta. And it is through this theta wave that we're able to experience an expansion. And that is what I suggest to you that 2012 was all about. After 30 years of an incredible influx of anionic energies, it is now, and these collate in certain areas, particularly around areas with gravitational changes, gravitational anomalies that are occurring all over the place. And so I talk a lot about people having what I refer to as ascension symptoms. And I'll talk a little bit why I think that it is absolutely essential that you take responsibility for maintaining your multi-dimensional body, for consciously developing that ability to shift from beta to theta. How many of you have heard of Dr. J. Alfred? Very few. He's an Australian doctor, originally from India. And he developed the idea of bioplasma, of plasma physics, in which he suggests that chakras are particle accelerators, that chakras connect us into what we might refer to as antimatter. And the concept of matter and antimatter, according to the Metatronic readings, is that matter exists on spectrums. Just as light exists in spectrums, matter exists in spectrums. And that ties into the Casey readings. How did Edgar Casey say the pyramids were built? He said they used that technology that made iron swim, that made rocks float. So if by using certain sounds, certain theta waves, certain waves, we are able to influence matter such that it goes into a different dimension, so to speak, or a different spectrum, then perhaps we exist in these other spectrums. Perhaps the angelic realm is the antimatter realm. And perhaps we enter physicality through particle accelerators that the great Vedics and the people of Rama call chakras, wheels, just like the one in CERN. Sort of looks like the Mayan calendar. The idea is that we could exist in other life forms that Dr. J. Alfred of Australia calls bioplasmic life forms. Maybe a few of them floating up in the ninth floor on here. Not evil. Evil doesn't exist on that realm. Perhaps on that floor. No. But so this is what the changes are about. Perhaps we are starting to learn our true multidimensional nature. Edgar Cayce spoke about Earth being the testing ground. Earth is a purposed illusion. It is the university of duality. Duality is not the rule, it is the exception. 93% of the known cosmos exist in dark matter. Physical matter is only 5 to 7%. We choose to exist in biological clothes, in a duality plane. Evil opposites do not exist in non-polarity planes. They can't. We have a North Pole and a South Pole. That is polarity. We have a magnetic aspect to the Earth. In polarity planes, there are opposites: good, evil, light, dark. In non-polarity planes, the physics is non-polar. There are no opposites. Greg Braden called it 0 point, saying that when you get into a 0 point field, there is no electromagnetic attraction. Let's take that a step further and put it into Vedic traditions, into what Edgar Cayce talks about, into what Metatron talks about. In these non-polarity planes, there can't be opposites. People talk about angels. My guidance is that angels, to a certain degree, not all of them, are holders of physics. There is an angel, if we want to give it that name, that holds the world of duality in place so that there can be opposites. The Bible has referred to that angel as Lucifer. There are no fallen angels. Angels are in a world in which I see of non-polarity, in which opposites don't exist. So we are in this duality plane as a testing ground to learn how to be responsible creators through the law of cause and effect by making mistakes. But there are physics, there are things that are going on that help us understand how we are coming into fields of duality, of greater awareness. Does that make sense? Are you following this? And so we have to become aware. We have to be really knowledgeable about the changes that are taking place. And this is my own work, my own theory. Hugh Newman's going to give an excellent talk tomorrow on Earth grades. And as a geologist, my first book was written about Earth sacred sites. And I have traveled to over 85 countries across the world. I believe that the grid system are related to planetary consciousness more than a geometric patterning of sacred sites. I think that there is a new grid that occurred in 2012, and I call it Windows 2012. And that's the comparison. You can get all confused with grids. But sacred geometry is the fabric of the cosmos. Every atom in your body has a geometric shape. And I think that there are what we call the 5 core geometries, or the platonic solids, which have a very interesting energy. And almost every gemstone is either on an atomic or molecular structure, one of the platonic solids or a derivative of the platonic solids. So if we consider that geometry not only a defining aspect in physical matter, it also has a defining aspect in non-matter, in light. There are forms of polarized and non-polarized light. So the new grid is Windows 2012. It is a server that allows more programs. Those programs are multi-dimensionality. Those programs are occurring through coronal mass ejections, through an activation of our understanding of certain sites on the Earth that allow us to use this stargate called the pineal gland through biochemistry, which actually has optical fiber in it, and change the channel on this receiver to go into theta waves. How many of you have read the Carlos Castaneda books? It has so many comparisons to Buddhism when they talk about an enlightened man looking like a luminous egg. I actually went to Mexico. I had a desire to do vision questing. And so for 7 years in a row, I did questing with a Native American elder where I went without food and water for 5 days. I was given water on the 3rd day, but no food for the entire time. And I had to make prayer ties, 444 prayer ties. And that took a day. So really there was 6 days with no food. But I've always been a big guy, so I knew that I couldn't do the 3-day. I had to do the 5-day. And to be quite honest with you, I never even got hungry until the 3rd day. That's how much extra weight I was carrying. But I did that 7 years. And on the first year I did it in Arizona. The second year I went to a Yaqui reservation in Tecate, Mexico, and I met Don Jerome, who is mentioned in the Carlos Castaneda books. And he was quite a character. He was more of a wizard than a spiritual person. I thought he was going to be some great spiritually evolved person. He was really a highly evolved shaman. And coming off of that 5-day fast, the first thing that he did was shoot energy bolts into me to see if I could defend myself, which I wasn't expecting and couldn't do, and it completely drained me of energy. And I was sick for a week. But it taught me a lesson. As you go into a multidimensional world, you have to maintain responsibility of these particle accelerators. And Edgar Cayce talked about how gemstones do this, about how gemstones project, and this is my part. I say that gemstones not only project light, that they separate light in terms of their refraction, single refraction, double refraction, and they also project their sacred geometry. The difference between a purple spinel and a purple amethyst, to someone just looking at color, may say, what's the difference? But that spinel has an octahedron that it's projecting, and that amethyst may have a hexagonal projection on a molecular basis. And those are part of the 5 chords. That spinel takes light and keeps it in a straight line, and that it is single refractive. And that double refractive amethyst is going to cut it in 90-degree angles and affect the duality realm. And the spinel is going to affect the non-duality realm, the etheric field. And so gems are energy vibrators. They are tools along the path. If you think gems are cosmetic vanities, buy the fake stuff. Gems are tools. And in gem knowledge is a forgotten science. The reason women live longer than men is because they wear gems. They are batteries. They are batteries. And I speak a little bit about the high priest's breastplate, about this breastplate that had 9 gems on it, that people used for what? The Jewish high priest used for what? To communicate with God. Out of body. Edgar Cayce spoke about crystals in Atlantis as being used to communicate with the divine. These are tools. Marcel Vogel talks a lot about crystals being the perfect structure. They are a metaphor of what we go through heat and pressure. All of their atoms line up in a perfect harmony. Through heat and pressure, all of our lifetimes line up. We get rid of the DOS. We are in these times in a crucible astrology where all the impurities are bubbling to the surface. Nothing happens on the earth plane that is not under a divine plan. The world seems like it's in chaos. What is happening? There is a structure in place that is bubbling up everything that does not serve you. All the stuff that's been swept under the rug is being percolated so that it can be dealt with. Even in your personal lives, relationships have to be defined. You may be in a position where you need to end a relationship or more clearly define it or change the terms of the agreement. But everything we have to face now. John speaks about a new time coming. But we have to clear up all these things. The family of Abraham, we have to sort that out. In our personal lives, we have to sort these things out before we can go into another era. And we have the chance to face them. Not only the chance to face them, the necessity to face them. It is just an exciting time. It is a difficult time. And so what I say on sacred sites is that sacred sites are more influenced by telluric energies, by mineralogy, than they are a geometrical presence. But that the grid itself is the program that allows us to tap into the multi-dimensionality. And so we are changing. Edgar Cayce predicted that in the new millennium, after 1998, humanity would shift into a new biology. And John Van Auken spoke about that in Denver and in Arizona. Dr. Carl Sagan, the acclaimed astrophysicist, stated in 1972 that the only other element capable of supporting human biology is silicon. What is silicon? Silicon dioxide is quartz, the bioshift. If you follow Cayce, then we are now in that phase in which he predicted our biologies would shift. If you follow Sagan, the only way it can shift and remain in physical materiality is to go into a silicon base, a crystal base. And so that is very, very interesting. These anion to cation ratio shifts affect the pineal, affect brain chemistry. Now, one of the most important things that you can do, and I'm going to end here and talk more this afternoon, is you have to take responsibility for that part of you that's existing in higher dimensionality. I suggest to you that because of solar radiation, you are now more capable of seeing things that otherwise you would not have seen. I think crop circles are part of the message around this, but you have the ability to see things. Duke University put out a study about a new photonic phenomenon called jellyfish light sprites. There are now light phenomena that are occurring that look like living jellyfish. And there was a crop circle in Wiltshire, England, where Andrew lives, that looked just like that years before it happened. Maybe because of biochemistry, maybe because of the anionic shift, we're able to see into other dimensions now. Maybe we're able to see bioplasmic life, as J. Alfred talked about, electrical forms of life, photonic forms of life. Maybe the reason we see orbs now and didn't 15 years ago is because we're able to perceive those forms of life. So with these changes, we have to become more aware of our etheric bodies. And one of the biggest causes of energy bleeding is fear, conflicts, energy differentials, like coming to a place here that has a very, very high energy. You need to shield that auric field or you're going to implode. And it's mechanical equalization. I used to, years ago, live in Africa, and I'd go to Glastonbury. And after 3 days or 4 days in Glastonbury, I'd suddenly feel tired, like I wanted out. I went from an elated high to a need to get out of it. And it's the energy differential, and I'll speak about that in just a minute. But there are a lot of things, especially extended air travel, pharmaceuticals that affect your auric energy. And I have devoted a lifetime to understanding these things. And I think that gems and minerals are one of the most important ways to deal with these, but not the only one. How many of you take medicines from the doctor that you're subscribed to? Almost everyone. One of the best ways to detox is an infrared sauna. Infrared saunas are highly affordable, and you drink a couple of liters of water a day, and if you're taking blood pressure medicine, diabetic medicine, it is a great way to flush that out of your system. And if you don't, they'll pile up and they will affect the ability of your particle accelerators to tune you into other dimensions. Saunas. Certain magnets have a way of helping you handle airplane flights better. Iron nickel meteorite, moldavites put out magnetic pulses. They should not be worn 24/7, but these are what I believe a scientific means of providing extra energy to the auric field. Never use a magnetic mattress. You don't want to stimulate the human nervous system all the time, but it can be used in certain situations. One of the greatest destroyers of the human energy field is fear. Fear absolutely puts out chemicals that will fracture your energy, make you bleed energy. And just the the intensity of the changing earth plane from the coronal mass ejections can create auric fractures. There is an etheric field that is the body you travel in the antimatter plane, and it has a circuitry, and you have to learn how to fine-tune those. You have to learn how to go into theta and to navigate in that other body. When I did those vision quests after 3 days, nothing happened my first 3 years, but after my third one, I had an out-of-body experience, and it was real, and I was able to see my body sitting on a hillside, and I was able to walk outside of it. And I learned how to navigate in that system. And after that, I went to South America after I did 7 years of this natural way, and I learned how to do it in another way with ayahuasca. It is a sacred plant that is not for everybody, but it was incredibly intense. And I went through what a Christian would call the judgment. I saw everything I had ever done wrong, and it put me into an intense look at how I was living my life. All the mistakes that I had made, I wanted to correct. And I did that over a series of 3 years, and I tell you, when I came off of those, it was absolutely no fun, but I was calling up people that I had done wrong 10 years ago and apologizing, because I realized that why we are here under that intensive scope. I went through the judgment, and I was the judge, and I was also the person that needed to make those corrections. And so it was a great learning process, and I saw the different bodies. And when I went out of my body, when I was in Bolivia, I experienced that navigation when I went up into what I call the Metatronic field. And I'm writing a book about that, and I'll talk about that in great detail, but it was an extraordinary experience. And I learned a lot about how to maintain those two bodies. Negative attachments can occur. You have to learn how to deal with people who are controllers. In metaphysics, you have a lot of spiritual ego. You have a lot of people that want to come up and tell you, oh, I see this on your aura, you got this, you need to work on this, and take that control. You don't need another person controlling you. You don't need a guru. If what I say doesn't make sense, don't listen to it. The time of the guru is over. You don't need ego imbalanced teacher coming up and telling you things. Now you have to become that teacher because the tools are there to do it. The tools are there to do it. You read that spiritual information and you go fast. John Van Auken talks about how important it is to learn how to go to that higher plane in his talk about Egyptian mysticism. It was very important for me to go to Mexico, to go to Arizona and fast and to see all those things that were wrong with me. And it wasn't fun. But when I finished it, I felt like a ton of bricks had been taken off. And you remove that dross, you remove that fuzz. And when you learn how to go into that other place and navigate in a different dimension, it's important because that's where the message comes from. You don't need some guru telling you you can do it yourself, but you have to make the effort, and you can't just sit down and it happens. There are allies along the path. Azurite, lapis, and things like that are allies, but it is you that does it. They're lights along the path, but you are the generator. But you have to learn how to get up into that other place. I don't just mean pray and be a nice person. You have to learn how to travel through those chakras and exist in that other lucid world, because that is where you become your higher self. That is where you meet the higher evolves, whether you want to call them deities or teachers or part of your higher self, because at some point we're all plurality consciousness. But that is what's happening now, and we can learn how to have these things. And one of the most important things to overcome is fear. Fear is the great destroyer. And this is what happened to my wife and I. We were caught in a coup d'etat in West Africa for 3 days, where they burned down the whole town. They took captives and set them on fire, put motorcycle tires on people soaked in oil, gasoline, and would burn them to death. We were rescued after 3 days by the French Foreign Legion. And I learned a lot about how fear can immobilize you, about how fear is what Casey calls the great destroyer. And so I learned a lot in that process about maintaining an auric field, and these are some remarkable tools. Infrared saunas, absolutely affordable. 1 million companies sells them on the internet. They will purify, get rid of the toxins. You can get one like that, put it in your garage, prefabricated, plug it in for about $2,000. And I use one every day. I have one in my garage. There's ways to use magnets to recharge the auric field. Iron nickel meteorites, moldavites are fantastic when you're dealing with a stressful situation or you're traveling. I wrote an article 8 years ago about how when you travel in an airplane, you are above the Schumann resonance, and that all of our organs are regulated by that Schumann resonance of 7.83 hertz. When we get above it, NASA discovered that some of the astronauts in the stations and the shuttles were having problems with kidneys. And when they put in ionic generators to match that pulse of the Earth, it resolved the issue. There are allies along the path. Azurite, lapis, and things like that are allies, but it is you that does it. Meditation, prayer, being associated with groups. So I want to thank you. I'll end on this note. I want to thank you for being here this morning.
would it look like and would you want to see? If seeing meant that you would